Hi everybody, it's Anne with Art on the Creek. Welcome back. I'm happy you're here to join me today in my studio. We're continuing our Backyard Birds in the Winter series, and I'm kind of taking liberties with that winter time because this is another bird that's more present in the summer. We hear him every night. We've got him out in our big pine tree, one of the big pine trees in our backyard. Where we live in Parker, we're next to a lot of ranch land and open space, so there's a lot of food for these birds of prey. I know that anymore though, in suburban and urban areas, these birds of prey are pretty regularly seen. So you all might be familiar with this one too. Let's try a great horned owl today. Are you ready? Let's go paint. I'm down here in my studio, and I hope that the background noises aren't too bad today. We've got the heater running, so you might hear a fan. I'm using the Arches Travel Journal. I am absolutely in love with this. This is probably going to be my go-to journal from now on. I'll definitely get more of them. I'm so excited that Arches finally came out with a format like this. I love to paint in this size. So I've got that all set up. I think what we're going to do today, we'll paint this owl in a horizontal format, in a landscape format. So let me go ahead and get this all taped up, and then I'll be right back. Okay, there we go. It's all taped off. I'm trying to use up my washi tape. I have a big jar of it, and I was gifted some, and I bought too much at one time. So the stickum on it really does go bad after a while. So I want to use it up before it doesn't stick at all. So in starting this horned owl, I think I'm going to start with his beak. When I draw animals, I either like to start with their eyes or their nose, a tongue hanging out if it's a dog with their tongue hanging out usually. What I like to do is to start with what appears to be one of the most expressive features on their face. So let me fast forward through this drawing here, and then we'll get to the painting. Now with this drawing, even though I have it on double speed, you'll see there's really not a lot of detail that we need. I do want to focus on those eyes though, because boy, when you look at this owl, that is one of the first things you notice. In fact, I think the first thing that you notice are the eyes. So I wanted to pay close attention to the shape and their location. When I'm drawing, we know that an owl has round eyes. Well, when you look really closely at this, the eyes aren't completely round. They're a little bit flat on top. And once again, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I am not a realistic painter. I do like to paint loosely, but I do focus some extra detail on some key features. And for me, it's eyes, noses, mouths, things like that. So we all know that an owl has feathers. We all know that he's got that beak, but I wanted to highlight some of these things. So what I'm going to do is be pretty careful on the eyes here and make sure that I have those reflective highlights drawn in. I want to remember to allow room for that when I'm painting. And since he is a great horned owl, I wanted to be sure that I had those horn feathers that make him look like he has horns. I always thought they were ears when I was a kid. I don't really know the anatomy of an owl all that well, but it made sense that it was an ear. I don't know. It looks kind of cool anyway. If it's just decorative, that's all right too, Mr. Owl. We're just going to kind of put in the basic lines for the rest of him here. And then I think what I'm going to do is get some masking fluid. So let's check that out. Now, before I go in with the masking fluid, I do want to take my my kneaded eraser and just lift off some of that graphite a little bit. I have had it happen with masking fluid that sometimes I put it over the pencil marks, and then when I lift off the masking fluid, for some reason, whatever, the pencil won't erase and it won't pick up. And since I'm putting this masking fluid down specifically to allow for white space, I want to make sure that I have either very, very light markings or actual white space under this masking fluid. Now, another good tip with masking fluid, I'm using a Winsor Newton masking fluid here, and I've just converted it to a bottle with a needle tip. You can get these just about anywhere. I like it because it has a little silicone cap, and it keeps the contents of the masking fluid nice and fresh. You might notice some different colorations on the bottom of the masking fluid. I did shake it up quite a bit before I used it today, but I really don't use masking fluid that often. I don't know if this is an issue or not. I haven't had any issues with it, so I'm continuing to use it until this little bottle is empty, and then I will clean it out thoroughly and refill it. The brushes I'm using today are by Tracy LeBenson. He is an amazing brush artisan out of the Pacific Northwest, and I've linked to his brushes before, and I will probably do it again since they are the only two brushes that I've used on this painting. If you ever wanted to try one of his handmade brushes, I highly recommend doing so. They are truly a gift to paint with. It just makes painting a pleasure. And it's kind of cool. It's kind of like when you first get a new update on your computer or on your phone and you realize there's a whole new feature. It's kind of like, that's kind of what it's like when you paint with a Tracy LeBenson brush. Tracy's brushes have such a wide performance range, and honestly, every time I use them, I'm discovering a new capability that I didn't know existed before. So that's something that's a lot of fun. Now, you may notice that I did not let the masking fluid dry. Right now, I'm just filling in the background, and I wanted to do some painting, and the masking fluid is not near this at all. When you use masking fluid, you either want to use a silicone tip, a toothpick, the back of a paintbrush, or an old paintbrush that you're not using anymore and that you really don't care too much about. To preserve that paintbrush, though, what you can do with masking fluid is to run it across a bar of soap first to help protect those bristles, and then sometimes you can rinse all of the masking fluid out. But what I like to do is just use this needle tip, and it's going to leave marks that aren't perfect. So I just like to let it go and kind of get it about where I want it, and then I'll go in and correct the weird looking marks. You'll see when we get to the end and take the masking fluid off. I like to correct those by painting over them or blurring the edges a little bit. In the background, I am using ultramarine and burnt umber. The burnt umber is M. Graham, and the ultramarine is Daniel Smith. When I'm done with this, we're going to let that masking fluid dry thoroughly on its own, because we don't want to use a heat tool on masking fluid. That can actually make it very hard to lift off of your paper. I actually let this dry about an hour. I was working on a different painting in the meantime. I really hate to wait. I gotta tell you, that was really hard for me. But I'm glad I did, because the masking fluid's ready to go now. So let's see where to begin. I think a real great place to start will be those gorgeous, intense eyes. The color that I'm going to start with is M. Graham Indian Yellow. And it's kind of a beautiful golden yellow. I really like it. We're going to go ahead and use my Tracy LeBenson brush. This is the longer one that I have. It really allows for a very fine hair point. My goodness, that was hard to say. And it allows you to get into extremely narrow spaces. And I do have some highlights situations in here that I wanted to allow for. So that's why I'm using this extreme detail brush, and I would call it extreme detail. This one I don't use as often as the other one with the lighter bamboo handle, because this particular one is really, it excels at little fine places like this. And so I use it for more detail. I'm also going to go over that yellow, the Indian yellow, with some Azo gold, some Azo yellow, excuse me, and also just a little bit of Hansa Yellow Deep. Both of those will be M. Graham colors. Just trying to blend in and mix the different shades that I'm seeing in the owl's eyes. And then let me skip ahead to the top of the owl's eyes, and I'll show you what I did there. I've still got the same detail brush, but now I'm going in and I'm adding just a tiny bit of transparent red iron oxide. This is a Daniel Smith paint that I have, and I find this to be absolutely essential. All of the paints that I'm using today are ones that I typically use in just about every painting that I do. I have found that this palette that I've kind of curated for my studio use, I use every single paint in this palette. Some of my favorite things to paint are those things which exist in nature, and this month of our backyard birds certainly fits that bill. So all of these colors that I have, all the paints that I have in this palette here, it's a Mijello palette, a 33 well palette. I really use every color in here. I have found a use, even if it's just a touch bit for one little painting. I have found that these colors are really the ones that occur around me naturally, and that's what I like to paint. Now, if I were a portrait artist, I probably would have a different palette. But for nature and for landscapes, for animals and nature scenes, this is the palette that I have found works the best for me. I do know that when I go to different parts of the country, I will rely more heavily on greens. But for today, this palette is working really well for our owl. So let's talk about his beak. I'm going to be completely honest with you. This beak, I think my eyes got crossed a little bit when I was looking at it because I kind of thought I was headed in one direction and then it just kind of didn't work. So what I did first was I put down this layer of ultramarine. And then you'll see the beak kind of change shape as the painting goes on. This part I was pretty confident in. I really did want to do this. But I think what I got lost in was after the masking fluid came off, I kind of lost the shape of the mouth. And I was able to save it, absolutely. But boy, I sure had to really look at that reference photo again just to see where I was going. Does that ever happen to you? You're painting along, everything is fine, and then you get to a point where you go, wait, what? What was I doing? So that's kind of what happened to me with this guy here. Let's move on and see where we're headed next. While I'm letting that beak dry, I decided to go ahead and put in a base wash of burnt umber all the way around the owl's body. I really enjoyed doing this. This Arches paper is just such a joy to work with, and I really do love this M-gram paint. So I was just having a lot of fun working on this, and I'm doing a little bit of negative painting here, just trying to allow for those feathers that come up in between his eyes, and trying to make sure that I'm putting the brown in all the necessary places without going under the black too much. Does that make sense? I don't want to put a lot of brown where the black will go on top of later. I guess that's the way to say that, because I don't want any of this to look like it's overworked. I'm trying to be very careful and let the nature of these feathers really stand out without having to do all the detail of every little feather. Now, if you want to learn how to do detailed feather work, Louise Damasi is one that I follow. I highly respect her art and I thoroughly recommend her. I'll link to her channel in the description, because if you are looking for a more realistic painter, she's your person. She is amazing. Like I said, I'm not. I don't paint photorealistically. I like to paint loosely. I like to let the brush strokes speak for the energy and the personality of the animal that I'm painting, and that is my style. And if you're here watching me, I really appreciate that, because I think that it's great to have you here. And of course, I would love to have you more. This is so fun. This is really my passion, to be able to share this painting with you, all of my paintings, and hopefully you can learn something from my channel. And I think that's what it's all about. That's why I like to recommend other artists too, because nobody's an island. We're all in this together. And in the comments, if you find some people that you really enjoy, please mention them. I know that I'm not the only YouTube artist out there. Good Lord, that would be scary if I was. But artists for everyone. And I think it was a wonderful thing to help other artists, and to recommend those that we like and those that we've learned from. And Louise is an artist out of Australia. Her paintings are stunning. They're breathtaking, and I can only hope to be detailed like her one day, although, to be honest, I don't have any plans on it because I don't enjoy it that much. I think that's what amazes me so much when people are very photorealistic painters or artists in general. I don't have that kind of patience. I just wasn't born that way. So, here we are. We're back to our owl, and he is just going to come together with however these brush strokes, my expressive brush strokes, will let him. So I'm kind of putting in the nostrils here and going around a little bit, getting that part of the mouth in. I'm trying to be really careful on the right side of the beak because there is a slight highlight there. I think I do end up going in with a little bit of bleed-proof white and accentuating that just a little bit more at the end. But for now, we're just going to go ahead and fill in his little jawline. I guess that would be like the corners of your mouth. I don't know what that part is called, but where his mouth opens and the skin is there on the side to connect that. And I'm just trying to get that painted. The cool thing about the masking fluid is, as you probably know if you've used it, if you haven't used it, it dries to a rubbery finish and you can just paint right over it. And what it does is it preserves the white areas underneath, so you don't have to worry about it. It really just lets you relax a little bit if you've got a lot of little detailed white areas that you want to paint. And I've jumped ahead a little bit. The mix that I'm using for the black is indigo, and red iron oxide. I'm trying to keep that highlight of his eyes to be expressed throughout. I didn't want to use the umber again because I've used that burnt umber in the background and in the owl, which is fine. You certainly could use it again, but I wanted the black to be a little more luminescent, and it's so subtle. But I have found that when you're using the red iron oxide and the indigo, it's just a little bit more, I don't know, brighter, a little bit more luminescent. I guess I can't really find the right word, but I didn't want it to be too grayed down, I guess. I don't know. Can you have a luminescent black? Maybe not. The difference is very subtle. It's if you don't have transparent red iron oxide, burnt sienna is a really good substitution. So I'm just using this same Lebenson brush that I've been using throughout the majority of the painting here. And again, those are the only two brushes that I've used throughout this painting. So you'll see how versatile they are in the ability that you have to cover wide areas as well as very fine hair-like strokes. So I'm just kind of delineating about a suggestion that there's feather variegation. Wow, that was hard to say. Yeah, they're variegated. The feathers are variegated. And I'm using some dry brushstroke technique on top of that burnt umber first wash there to kind of try and suggest that the feathers are a bit of a mottled look. They're not defined as they were on our flicker a little bit, where we had almost a polka dot chest. This one, it seems like the feathers themselves have the two colors in. So let's zoom forward a little bit more and see what else we're going for. Now on his wing, I am intentionally using a darker value of that same black mix. And in fact, I will go in later with some straight indigo and darken those up. But I wanted to definitely do wide swaths on the wing to demonstrate that those feathers are a little bit different than the little downy feathers on his face. So we'll just continue here with some burnt umber and go in with the next layer. And kind of using a little bit of that dry brush technique. Whenever I've got the brush kind of laying down on the side, that's what you're doing. And if you're not familiar with what dry brush technique is, I highly recommend trying it. It's so fun. I use it a lot because it does something that's just one of my favorite things, and that's when you let the art supplies do the work for you. What you're doing with your dry brush technique is, you can see I'm holding the brush so that the belly of the brush, the side of it, skims across the top of the paper. Now, as you know, watercolor paper does have a little bit of texture to it. This is a technique that works best on cold press or rough press watercolor paper. It's not quite as easy on hot press. You can do it, but it's just not as easy. You hold that brush on its side and skim it over the surface of the paper. And because that paper has tooth, because it's got those peaks and valleys, the paint will catch on the peaks of the paper there. So you can just create those spots and random shadows that really give something a natural look. And I use it on mountainsides, I use it on rocks, I use it on animals. I love adding texture with dry brush technique. Let's see where we can go next. I've skipped ahead to the eyes because I want to show you how I did the eye detail here. I started out using that same mix that I did with the feathers because I didn't want to go too dark at first. And I wanted to get the shape around his eyes really just right. I didn't want to make those lines too thick because then it can really look like your animal has eyeliner on, and you know, unless you're doing some kind of a Billy Idol owl, that won't work. But for this one, I think this brush really helped me out. And I know I talk about this brush all the time, every time I use it, but man, if you can get the chance, I really recommend trying something like this because it'll help you. It'll really help you improve your paintings because this brush is so versatile. So back to the eyes here. This one on the right, I guess it's the owl's left, our right. The highlight in this eye is really kind of strange. They're not the same. So the highlight on his right eye, our left, is more rectangular. And this one is kind of just a foggy shape. And later on, I did have to kind of reshape the pupil because sadly, I got to a point where it kind of gave him it looked like he had a cataract. So I was able to correct that and give him good crisp vision again. It's so funny when you're painting all of these little things that are so subtle can have a very dramatic effect on the outcome. So that's why I wanted to be real careful around here. And you see these little small strokes I'm making. Sometimes I'm doing negative painting. Sometimes I'm intentionally adding the black feathers in, and just really trying to be very careful around that line around the eye. So let's move ahead just a little bit. There are some of those feathers over his eyes. I wonder if they call those eyebrow feathers. I don't know. I'm kind of thinking owls are pretty cool. And in the beginning, when I said, he wasn't around in the winter, of course they are. They're here. They're around in the winter. We just don't see them, which is what I meant. Yeah, in the summer, it's so nice because we sleep with our windows open, and we can hear him out there, and just his hoo hoo hoo. I don't make a good owl sound, but it's so comforting, and it's just so nice to know that he's out there either looking for his mate or looking for food for his family, or maybe it's the mom, maybe it's the she, I don't know. Okay, so now I have gone in with a little bit darker level of the black. I think when I went over those crown feathers there, that was actually kind of an indigo, and now that's what I'm doing here with these darker feathers. A little bit of negative painting, and what that means, if you haven't caught one of my videos before where I explain that, is when you cut into an area with your paintbrush with a darker color, at least this is the way I use negative painting. There's lots of ways to do it, and you can get some really fascinating results with negative painting when you do it all throughout. But when you cut into one area with something darker, it actually is kind of, I like to explain it as an optical illusion, because it kind of makes that lighter area overlap the dark area that you've just cut into, if that makes sense. So that's what I'm kind of trying to do here. These are the dark feathers here that are going to separate his head from the wing, because he's kind of got his head turned. And I am using a pretty thick mix of mostly indigo here. I think I'm going in with straight indigo, yeah. And now we're going to punch up these feathers on the wing and get those caught up to speed. All of this depth and dimension is really captured through layers. And that is something that, again, watercolor will work for you because it's a transparent medium. So the first layer, remember, was that wash of the burnt umber. And then we went over it with a mix of the indigo and the red iron oxide to create the first level of kind of a charcoal gray-ish, kind of a shadow for the feathers. And then I went in with a darker level of indigo. And then finally, we've gone around with a level of the burnt umber and done a lot of that dry brush and some more intentional painting there just to create more layers. Now this is something, if you do not have Potter's Pink, I recommend that you get your hands on some Potter's Pink. I'm filling in his tongue area and mouth, and I went ahead and went on both sides to do this, and I think this might be where I got my eyes kind of crossed on the beak, because I didn't need to do it on the right side there. But the Potter's Pink is a pigment. The one that I have is Daniel Smith. Many companies make it. Typically, it takes a little bit to get it reactivated again. You just need to spray it ahead of time or have a lot of water on your brush, because it does absorb that really well. So what I did was I went in there with that Potter's Pink and created his tongue. It's such a granulating pigment that, once again, it will do all of the texture work for you, and you will hardly have to do a thing. Now I wanted to add another layer of depth to his eyes, so I went in there this time with that Mijello Deep, and I concentrated that on the bottom half of the eyes. And then I think I'm going to go in with some more of the transparent red oxide and just kind of trying to get the texture in his irises, get that really in there so that it'll look a little more like an actual eye rather than just two orange circles. So that's another tip for you. When you are painting any kind of eye, the eyelid will create a shadow. And if you look closely at the eye, there I'm putting the striations of color in with just the tip of the brush. I think I went in with some of that burnt umber and kind of intensified the shadows along the top of the eye. Let's go skip ahead to that part. Here we are. I did mix that red iron oxide with just a touch of burnt umber so I could just have it toned down just a little bit. I didn't want it to glow, but I did want that shadow to be there. So once I add that part, I think you'll see, I hope it shows up on camera, that really just makes those eyes look a lot more round. Now I've let that dry. You can use a heat tool at this point, but when you've got masking fluid on the surface, remember, you want to use that heat tool extremely carefully and hold it far away from your painting, but I let mine dry naturally. And I'm just using my thumb to rub off that masking fluid. And here's what I mean when I was saying earlier that it leaves lines that look a little fake, that they need some work still. It does leave your white space, but the lines don't look right. He kind of looks like a puppy. So we need to get in there and fix those up. So let's do that. Now the first thing I want to do is go in and create that little point in the corner of his eye. And I noticed that when I started painting, I was feeling an odd resistance, and there was just some masking fluid that I didn't quite see. So now that I've got that off completely, I can go into the ultramarine. And the one I have on my palette is a Daniel Smith Ultramarine Blue. It's a really nice one, a good shade. I've kind of found ultramarine to be pretty consistent across the board with the different brands, but you know, find one that you like and use that one. What I'm doing with the ultramarine is I'm cutting into that white space. Again, this is a form of negative painting. And I am adding shadows to the white feathers that would be there. Right now we just have a flat plane of white, and we need to get some depth and dimension into that plane. And the way that we do that with any kind of painting or drawing is to add shadows and leave highlights. So what I'm doing right now is my eyes are on my paper, going back to the reference photo, to the paper, to the reference photo. And I am constantly, every time my brush pauses, you'll see I am looking at the reference photo. And I'm trying to get a general sense of where the shadows are in his white feathers, and noticing that some of those feathers actually do have a blue tint to them. So lots of things to observe about this owl as you're painting, but maybe you can even see at this point, when I've just got a very few shadows in there, how much dimension that's added to that left side of his face, our right side. So just continuing on with this in varying levels of strength in the viscosity of that paint, and I don't think I got it thicker than a 2% milk, though. I didn't go as thick as a cream. I kind of kept it toward that milky consistency. So let's see, let's go around the eye here now. I'm back into the indigo, and I want to fill in that white a little bit. I had an idea when I was first painting it, and it didn't quite work out when I first put that masking fluid on, rather. I had an idea, and it just kind of didn't work out that way. So this was the moment when I realized, you know, that I can go back in with the bleed-proof white and get those highlights the way I want it, exactly around his eye. So right now he is going to look like he's wearing some eyeliner, but we will correct that as we go on. I've added some more of those shadows in his white feathers with some of that black mix and with the indigo and the red iron oxide. I didn't want it too dark. And now I'm going in with that bleed-proof white, and I'm trying to get these highlights on the feathers to work the way I want to. And at this point, it's not cooperating with me. The lines are coming off my brush too thick. I thought, well, okay, maybe I've got too much paint on my brush. But the plus in that little happy accident there, and I am going to call it a happy accident, is that it added that foggy highlight on top of the beak. And then at that moment, my eyes could finally see what I did. When I put that tongue on our right, on the owl's left side, it made the upper beak too small. And I didn't see it until just this moment when I finally realized what I had done. So I went in there and corrected that with making the highlights right and painting over that lip on the owl's left side, our right, making that black. So I just have the separation of the beak from the lip there, and then we're working on this highlight. And there's a technique too that I do a lot where I'll paint it and then just use my finger to pick it up, because oftentimes that will leave you just the right amount of fogginess. You'll see I've got some highlights in the eyes done a little bit, and I've got some highlighted feathers up around his eyes as well. But let's skip forward just a little bit, and we'll see what other details we put in. I filled in a few more feathers, and at this point I am adding that ring around his eye. I decided that since the masking fluid didn't work quite the way I wanted to, I had intended on coming in here with some black and doing my black mix and doing negative painting, but I kind of like doing it this way better. I like the way it turned out. I like the way the feathers are definitely on top, and that helps his eye to recede. And now I'm going to add in some of the highlighted feathers that I see. So we'll get those done, and then we'll check back in. I've given that a quick dry with the heat tool, and now I'm using this wonderful brush to cut in between those highlights, and you can do that. It's a really cool brush. And I'm using my dark indigo there, just plain indigo, to show where the owl's mouth is peeking through. This is that part, the corners of his mouth. Why couldn't I think of that before? Corners of your mouth. That's such a simple thing to say. Oh my gosh, sometimes I tell you, these senior moments. Anyway, we've got the black part of the owl's mouth there, and I am putting it underneath those white feathers, so I'm being really careful when I paint this part. But this is what's going to set that beak correctly and make that mouth look the way I wanted it to. And now my struggle with his beak is almost done. I'm going to go in now and put those nostrils in. These owl nostrils are kind of interesting, I realize, because they don't have that typical highlight. At least on my monitor, they didn't. And I zoomed in, I looked really closely, and I could not see them. But I did like how they are shaped and where they're located. So once I got those nostrils back in, that was just kind of the, open the heavens, let the magic moment happen. And I was very pleased with it at this point. I tell you all of this because if you're painting this owl and you get discouraged at any point, don't just get up and walk away, or come back to it the next day. Or you know what, you can also take a picture of it, look at that picture in black and white, change it to black and white on your phone, and then you'll see what you're missing. The phone creates a veil between you and your painting, and it makes it so much easier to see. It's almost like the view that someone would have, who's someone else looking at it. When we see pictures of ourselves, we're always kind of like, oh my gosh, is that how I look? It's because that's how others see us. So if we take a picture of our painting, we can see how others will see it. And that helps us to remove our clouded, laser vision that we have, if that can be such a thing, to have a clouded laser vision. But I mean, intense focus. And we're so into that when we're painting that we need to have tools like that in our camera, or putting the painting across the room, squinting at it. Those kinds of things are very helpful, and I highly recommend using your camera for more than just taking pictures. Absolutely, you can use it as a tool to improve your art. That's one of the greatest gifts we have with technology, is that it's a tool. I don't consider it cheating. I consider it a tool that we can use to help us improve. And once we've reached whatever goal we wanted to reach, then we don't need that tool anymore. It's just like when you learn to ride a bike. You learn with training wheels first. Nobody knows how to do it right the first time. It really is true. None of us are the same person today that we were yesterday. And, without having to quote too many Hallmark posters or little memes or GIFs or whatever they are now, I just want to encourage you. I just want you to be here to have a good time with your art, to let yourself grow, to let yourself learn, to remember that, if this is the first time you've done something, that's okay if you make a mistake. Just do it again next time. And, maybe you'll find out that the mistake wasn't as big a deal as you thought it was. Maybe it wasn't a mistake at all. Maybe it was just an opportunity to realize that maybe your painting wasn't quite finished. But we've stuck it out, we've kept going, and now our owl is in fact finished. I'm using that heat tool to help me release the adhesive on that washi tape, even though it would probably pull off on its own. I just don't like to risk it. I like to use that heat tool to assist in that. And now you can see here, we've got him done. I'm going to go ahead and sign him as I always do. And then of course, after I filmed this, I realized that he wasn't done. And you can see there in the close-up, it's on his right tear duct. I still need to finish that little area. I just never went back and finished it. So we'll get there. In this close-up, I think you can see I did finish that tear duct. I just added a simple layer of Potter's Pink, and its granulation just helped me with all the little speckles and dots in there. I didn't need to do a thing. Guys, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you're enjoying this series on backyard birds, and I hope you're enjoying watching the birds in your area, if not mine here on YouTube. We'll see you next time. I hope everyone's having a great week. Bye now.